She is lying on a table, not a hospital table, not a massage table, something improvised, something that was never meant for what is happening to her right now. There are women in the room, women she knows, women she has trusted, women who told her this was an honor, that she should be grateful, that what is about to happen will change her life. A medical instrument is heated, and then it touches her skin. She has been told not to scream. She has been told to say thank you. She has been told that the pain is the point, that surrendering to it is proof of her commitment, her loyalty, her strength. She has been coached on exactly what to say and exactly how to behave. So she lies still, and she is burned, not tattooed, not marked with ink, burned, cauterized, a brand pressed into the skin of her pelvis. A symbol she was told was a geometric design, an ancient mark of feminine power. It was not. It was his initials. The initials of the man who designed this ritual. The man who was never in the room when it happened, who kept his hands clean while women held down other women. The man who told them all that pain was just weakness leaving the body. The brand was approximately 2 inches. It took roughly 20 to 30 minutes to complete. Women were photographed during the process. Those photographs were kept on file. Insurance, some would later say. Evidence of compliance. A leash that never had to be pulled because everyone already knew it was there. When this moment finally became public, when the details of what happened in those rooms reached the outside world, people struggled to understand how it had gotten this far. How educated women, successful women, women with careers and families and full lives had found themselves on that table. That is the question this story exists to answer. Because this wasn't a fringe operation. This wasn't some isolated compound in the middle of nowhere. This was a self-improvement empire with offices in New York, chapters across the world, celebrity endorsements, and a waiting list. It called itself a community. It called itself a movement. It called itself the most ethical organization in human history. And at the center of it all was one man. A man who called himself the smartest person in the world. A man who had not lost a single game of chess in years, according to him. A man who, according to prosecutors, had built an elaborate machine, layer by layer, year by year, designed to do one thing: feed his appetites, at any cost to anyone else. His name was Keith Raniere, and before this is over, you're going to understand exactly how he did it. You have to understand what Keith Raniere looked like to the world before you can understand how any of this worked. He wasn't physically imposing. He was slight, soft-spoken. With long hair he wore loose and an unhurried way of moving through space. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He listened. And in a world where most people feel deeply, fundamentally unheard, a man who listens, who looks at you like you're the most interesting person he has ever met, can be extraordinarily powerful. Keith Allen Raniere was born on August 26, 1960, in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up primarily in Suffern, a suburb in Rockland County. By his own account, and by the account of people who knew him young, he was precocious. He was reading at a very young age. He had a talent for pattern recognition, for mathematics, for absorbing information quickly. He also had, from a young age, a deep hunger for people to recognize those abilities. He attended Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, graduating in 1982 with degrees in mathematics, biology, and physics. That combination would become part of his mythology. He would repeat it often. He wanted people to know he was not ordinary. After college, he cycled through various ventures. He sold and distributed consumer goods. He was involved in a company that sold vitamins. And then, in the late 1980s, he co-founded a multi-level marketing company called Consumers Byline. The company grew quickly, too quickly. Regulators in more than 20 states began investigating. Attorney General offices issued complaints. The core problem was the structure of the business, one that critics and regulators alleged bore the hallmarks of a pyramid scheme. Consumers Byline eventually collapsed under legal pressure, and Raniere paid a settlement in New York without admitting wrongdoing. It should have ended his ambitions. It didn't. What it taught him instead, prosecutors would later argue, was how to structure things differently, how to build loyalty before building a business, how to make people believe in something before asking them to sacrifice for it. In 1998, Raniere co-founded a new company with a woman named Nancy Salzman. They called it Executive Success Programs, or ESP. The pitch was straightforward. This was a personal development curriculum based on something Raniere had developed called rational inquiry. It was designed, they said, to help people overcome their psychological limitations, identify their emotional blocks, and reach their full potential. The early workshops weren't cheap, several $100s for a 5-day intensive. But the people who attended them came away transformed. Or at least they felt transformed. They felt seen. They felt understood in ways they hadn't been before. They told their friends, and the friends came. By the mid-2000s, executive success programs had expanded. It had chapters in Albany, New York City, Los Angeles, and Mexico. It had thousands of students. It had wait lists. And it had rebranded. The new name was NXIVM, pronounced Nexium, like the heartburn medication, though Raniere's lawyers once sent cease and desist letters to the pharmaceutical company. An early indicator, perhaps, of how NXIVM's leadership responded to anything that challenged its image. Raniere himself did not appear in the early sales materials. He was referred to internally as Vanguard, a title his followers used with apparent sincerity. He preferred to operate from the background, to be known to those inside, revered by them, while remaining largely invisible to the outside world. That invisibility, it turned out, was a feature, not a bug, because what was happening inside NXIVM was something that would take years and the courage of a small number of people to fully expose. To understand why NXIVM worked, you have to set aside the instinct to judge and replace it with something harder: empathy. The women who joined NXIVM were not naive. They were not uneducated. They were not weak. They were nurses and lawyers and entrepreneurs and actresses. They were mothers and daughters. They were women who had tried other things: therapy, yoga, religion, self-help books, and found something missing. They came to NXIVM because they wanted to be better, to live bigger, to stop being held back by patterns they could feel but couldn't name. That is not a character flaw. That is a human need, and NXIVM knew how to meet it. The introductory workshops were called intensives. 5 days of exercises, group discussions, and presentations based on Raniere's rational inquiry system. Former members have described the experience as genuinely useful at the beginning, emotionally engaging, socially bonding, intellectually stimulating. The kind of experience where you cry and laugh and feel like you've figured something out about yourself. The community that grew around those workshops was warm. People formed real friendships. They supported each other. They celebrated each other's milestones. There were shared meals and volleyball games. Raniere loved volleyball and a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. Volleyball, incidentally, was not optional. Raniere scheduled games that often ran very late into the night. Attended among the women drawn to NXIVM was a woman named Sarah Edmondson. She was a successful actress based in Vancouver, a natural leader, charismatic and ambitious. She heard about NXIVM through a friend and attended her first intensive in 2005. She was, by her own later account, immediately impressed. She rose quickly through the organization's ranks, eventually becoming one of its top recruiters, bringing in hundreds of members over the years. She believed in it, genuinely. There was also Allison Mack. Many people know that name now, but before 2017, she was best known as the actress who played Chloe Sullivan on the television series Smallville. Mack joined NXIVM in 2006 and became one of its most devoted members, and, in time, one of Keith Raniere's closest associates. And then there was the woman who would become, in some ways, the public face of NXIVM's celebrity connections, Kristen Kruk, also a Smallville actress, also recruited early. Though Kruk, importantly, left the organization years before its implosion and has stated publicly that she had no knowledge of what was happening in its inner circles. But perhaps the most consequential new member, in terms of what came next, was Claire Bronfman. Claire Bronfman was the daughter of Edgar Bronfman Sr., the late billionaire who headed the Seagram Company. She and her sister Sarah were heiresses to an enormous fortune. Claire joined NXIVM in 2003 and became, over the following years, its primary financial backer. She funded lawsuits against critics and former members. She funded investigations into journalists who wrote critically about the organization. She funded the infrastructure that allowed NXIVM to expand its reach across borders. Her money, prosecutors would later argue, was the fuel that kept the machine running long after it should have collapsed. Within NXIVM's hierarchy, members were ranked by colored sashes, a system that tracked advancement through the curriculum. The higher your rank, the more you had invested. The more you had invested financially and emotionally and psychologically, the harder it became to leave. That was not an accident. The community was real. The friendships were real. The sense of purpose was real. But underneath all of it, something else was being built. Something that the people in those early workshops had no way of knowing was coming. Something that only revealed itself once you were already in too deep to leave easily. The first thing you should know about cults, and NXIVM was whatever its own protestations a cult, is that they do not look like cults from the inside. They look like family. As NXIVM grew, a smaller, more exclusive group began to form around Keith Raniere. This inner circle operated under a different set of rules. The public face of NXIVM was professional development, ethical living, rational thinking. But inside the inner circle, Raniere was something more than a teacher. He was the standard against which everything was measured. He called himself Vanguard. His most senior associate, Nancy Salzman, was called Prefect. There were rituals around these titles, forms of address, protocols of behavior, expectations of deference. Former members and court testimony have described a system of what Raniere called ethics, which functioned less like a moral framework and more like a mechanism of control. Members were encouraged to confess their fears, their secrets, their mistakes to the organization. These confessions were documented. They were called collateral in some contexts, a term that would become far more sinister later. Raniere, according to testimony and accounts from former members, had a specific pattern with women. He presented himself as a spiritual guide, a mentor, a man uniquely capable of seeing their true potential. He cultivated intense, one-on-one relationships. He positioned himself as the only person who truly understood them. He also, according to multiple accounts supported by trial testimony, had sexual relationships with numerous women in the organization simultaneously, relationships that women were, in at least some cases, not fully aware were shared. Prosecutors alleged that these relationships were not fully consensual in the legal sense, that they were the product of manipulation and manufactured dependency. Raniere maintained that all relationships were consensual. What is documented through court testimony and the accounts of former members is this: Raniere had an apparent preference for very thin women and reportedly created internal pressure around weight and body image. He reportedly had rules about whom members could spend time with, what they could eat, when they could sleep. He allegedly required some women to send him photographs of themselves every morning. The control was granular. It was intimate, and it operated in a social environment where questioning Raniere was treated as a sign of psychological limitation, proof that you hadn't completed enough of the curriculum, that your ego was still in the way. The system was designed so that the person who felt most controlled always blamed themselves. Around 2015, a new development occurred inside NXIVM structure. A secret sisterhood was formed. It was called DOS, an acronym for a Latin phrase meaning, roughly, lord over the obedient sisterhood, or, depending on the translation, dominant over subordinate slaves. Women were recruited into DOS by women above them in the hierarchy. They were not told who was at the top of the structure. They were told it was a women-only organization, a group of strong women supporting each other, a space for radical growth. That was not true. At the top of DOS was Keith Raniere, and the women who were recruited into it were asked, before they were told anything about what the organization actually was, to provide collateral, compromising material, photographs, damaging confessions, things that could destroy their reputations, their relationships, their careers, things that ensured they could never speak about what they were about to experience without paying a catastrophic price. It was, in legal terms, extortion. In the language of NXIVM, it was called a commitment device, and it worked until it didn't. In the spring of 2017, Sarah Edmondson sat in a room in Albany, New York. She had been a member of NXIVM for 12 years. She had recruited hundreds of people. She had built her life inside this world. She believed in it, or had believed in it, until recently. She had been invited to join DOS. The pitch had been exactly what we described: a secret sisterhood, a support structure, a space for women to be their best selves. She had provided collateral, material she was told would never be used, that existed only as a symbol of her commitment. And now she was on the table. She has spoken publicly about what happened in that room. A doctor was present. Women she knew were present. She was told to lie still. She was told to say thank you. And she was branded. She has described the pain as extraordinary. She has described watching the smoke rise from her own skin. When she left Albany and returned home to Vancouver, she showed her husband, actor and producer Anthony Ames, what had been done to her. And she told him what had happened. He didn't hesitate. They began talking to other people. They began comparing notes. And they began reaching out to journalists. The couple contacted Frank Parlato, a man with a complicated history with NXIVM himself. He had previously worked as a publicist for the organization before becoming one of its most persistent critics. And they contacted reporters at the New York Times. In October 2017, a bombshell piece ran in the Times under the bylines of reporters Barry Meyer and Emily Steele. The headline described NXIVM as a group in which women have been branded with the initials of its leader and subjected to blackmail-like tactics. The story described DOS. It described the collateral system. It described the brandings. NXIVM's response was immediate and aggressive. The organization issued statements disputing the reporting. It launched legal challenges. It claimed the women involved were lying, that they had consented freely to everything, that the brand was a symbol with no specific meaning. But by this point, something had changed. Other women were talking, not just to journalists, to federal investigators, because unbeknownst to NXIVM's leadership, the FBI had already opened a case. The investigation had actually begun earlier, sparked in part by the persistent reporting of Frank Parlato on his website, The Frank Report, and a prior New York Times investigation in 2012 that had looked at allegations against the organization. For years, the stories had circulated and the investigations had stalled. NXIVM used its resources, Claire Bronfman's money in particular, to fight back legally at every turn. But the 2017 Times piece, combined with Edmondson's willingness to speak on record and show her brand publicly, changed the trajectory. Think about what it took for that to happen. To show a scar, to stand in front of cameras and say, "This is what was done to me, and I'm telling you about it," knowing that the material I provided is still out there, knowing that people I considered family will say I am lying. That is not a small thing. That is the thing that broke NXIVM open. To fully understand what the investigation was uncovering, you have to understand the structure of DOS in more detail. The organization operated on what was called a master-slave model. Women who joined were assigned a master, a woman above them in the hierarchy who had recruited them. They in turn were expected to recruit their own slaves. The structure created multiple tiers, with information flowing up but not down. Masters had access to the collateral provided by their slaves. If a slave wanted to leave or spoke about DOS to anyone outside it, the collateral could be released. Women were told this explicitly at the time they joined. The collateral that was collected was not symbolic. Former members in court testimony described it as including sexually explicit photographs, false confessions written at the request of the master, and information about family members, including, in some cases, information that could harm the families of the women involved if released. According to court testimony, Keith Raniere directed the structure and operation of DOS through Allison Mack, who was his direct subordinate in the hierarchy and one of the most active recruiters of new members. Raniere's name was not shared with most DOS members. They were told the organization had no male involvement. Women in DOS were given what were called assignments by their masters. These included sending naked photographs to a number. That number belonged to Raniere, though they were told it was a woman. They included maintaining caloric restrictions. They included being available to respond to messages at any hour. Failure to respond quickly was treated as a punishable act of disobedience. Some women in DOS were what prosecutors described as sexual slaves, women who were directed toward sexual activity with Raniere as part of their readiness assignments. This is where the federal charges of sex trafficking would eventually be anchored. Sex trafficking, under federal law, does not require violence or physical kidnapping. It requires that someone be induced to perform commercial sex acts through force, fraud, or coercion. Prosecutors argued that the collateral system constituted fraud and coercion, that women had been deceived about what they were joining, what would be expected of them, and who was at the top of the hierarchy. The defense would argue, in trial, that everything was consensual, that the women involved were adults who made informed choices. But the evidentiary record told a different story. Internal communications, texts, emails, and other digital messages had been preserved. Those communications showed Raniere directing specific activities within DOS. They showed him receiving photographs of women who were told they were being sent to a female leader. They showed the internal language of the organization, the terminology of masters and slaves, of punishments and readiness, of debt and obligation. And then there were the women themselves. By early 2018, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York had built a case. A grand jury had been convened. Warrants were in preparation, but there was a problem. Keith Raniere had left the country. In late 2017, as the New York Times coverage intensified and federal scrutiny mounted, Keith Raniere traveled to Mexico. He went to Puerto Vallarta, a resort city on Mexico's Pacific coast. He was accompanied by several women. He continued, according to accounts, to operate as though nothing had changed. He gave instructions. He held meetings. He maintained control over DOS remotely. The Mexican authorities would later say they received a tip. The FBI, working with Mexican law enforcement, tracked Raniere's location. On March 25, 2018, Keith Raniere was arrested in Puerto Vallarta. Mexican immigration authorities detained him and placed him on a plane. He was transported to the United States and taken into federal custody. He was charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and a series of related offenses. The same day, NXIVM's world began to collapse in real time. In the months that followed, a series of co-defendants were arrested. Nancy Salzman, the prefect, pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy. Her daughter Lauren Salzman, a senior NXIVM figure and one of the most active participants in DOS, was arrested and would eventually plead guilty. Claire Bronfman was arrested and charged with facilitating illegal entry into the United States and fraudulent use of identification. Allison Mack was arrested in April 2018 on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. The Mack arrest generated enormous media coverage. She had been a recognizable television actress. The idea that someone known from a popular primetime drama had allegedly been recruiting women into a sexual servitude organization was almost impossible to process for many observers. Her arrest outside her home in Los Angeles was captured on camera. She appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty initially. The investigation that led to these arrests had been painstaking. Federal agents had interviewed dozens of former and current members. They had obtained and analyzed thousands of pages of digital communications. They had traced financial flows. Millions of dollars moved through accounts in ways investigators alleged were designed to facilitate the organization's operations. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a hard drive containing materials related to DOS, photographs, communications, records of the collateral collected. That material, investigators said, provided direct documentation of the coercive system. Witnesses who cooperated with federal prosecutors included Lauren Salzman. Her testimony at trial was among the most significant. She was a senior figure in the organization. She had been Raniere's romantic partner for years. She testified, participated directly in activities that would form the basis of criminal charges. She told the jury, specifically in the context of one woman who had been confined in a room for months in what the prosecution characterized as a period of captivity, details that were difficult for observers in the courtroom to hear. She described how she and others had monitored this woman. She described Raniere's involvement. She described her own participation. She was, by the time she testified, speaking under a cooperation agreement. She had accepted responsibility for her own conduct. Her testimony lasted multiple days. It was detailed, it was specific, and according to reporting from journalists covering the trial, it visibly affected the jurors. The prosecution team, led by Assistant United States Attorney Moira Penza, was building a case that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. There was the structural argument. NXIVM was, in legal terms, a criminal enterprise. There was the specific conduct argument. Raniere had directed sex trafficking and other crimes. And there was the character argument. Raniere was not what he claimed to be, and the evidence would prove it. A former girlfriend testified that she had been involved with Raniere when she was 15 years old, that their relationship had begun when she was a minor and he was in his 40s. This testimony was significant because it spoke to a pattern of behavior, a pattern prosecutors argued had been operating for decades. Raniere did not testify in his own defense. The defense team argued that everything that had occurred within NXIVM and DOS was consensual, that adults had freely made choices, that the government was criminalizing alternative lifestyles, and that witnesses cooperating with prosecutors had incentives to exaggerate or fabricate. The jury heard all of it. They deliberated for less than 2 days. On June 19, 2019, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all 7 counts: sex trafficking, racketeering, racketeering conspiracy, forced labor, guide fraud conspiracy, sex trafficking conspiracy, attempted sex trafficking, all 7, unanimous. When the verdict was read, Keith Raniere stood at the defense table. Multiple outlets reported that he showed little visible reaction. He had maintained, throughout the proceedings, the composure of a man who believed he would be vindicated. The jury disagreed. Outside the courthouse in Brooklyn, some former members who had traveled to witness the verdict were in tears. Not because they were surprised, because the verdict was real. Because after years of being told they were wrong, that they were liars, that they were defectors motivated by jealousy or instability, 12 strangers had listened to the evidence and agreed. The sentencing would come later, but first, the ripple effects moved through everyone connected to the case. Nancy Salzman, who had pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy, faced sentencing. She had cooperated to a degree with the government. Her attorneys emphasized her cooperation and her own victimization within the organization, a complicated argument given her senior role and the scope of her involvement. Lauren Salzman had pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy. She had cooperated extensively. Her sentencing would come after her father's. Claire Bronfman had pleaded guilty in 2019 to charges of conspiracy to conceal and harbor illegal aliens for financial gain and fraudulent use of identification. She had not cooperated with the government's case against Raniere. Her wealth, prosecutors argued, had been central to NXIVM's ability to suppress critics and sustain operations. And then there was Allison Mack. In April 2019, Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy charges. She spoke in court when she entered her plea. She apologized to the women who had been harmed. She said she had been manipulated. She said she was deeply remorseful. It was a complicated moment because Mack was simultaneously a person who had caused significant harm, who had recruited women into DOS, collected their collateral, and directed their activities, and a person who herself had been operating within a system of coercion and manipulation designed by someone else. Both things were true. The law is not designed to easily hold both things at once. The question of how to sentence people who were victimizers and victims simultaneously would sit at the center of the legal aftermath. For Keith Raniere, the question was different. The evidence indicated he had designed the system. He had created DOS. He had directed its activities. He had been, according to jury verdict, at the top of a criminal enterprise. The sentencing hearing was set for October 2020. The sentencing of Keith Raniere took place on October 27, 2020. Judge Nicholas Garaufis of the Eastern District of New York presided. Before pronouncing sentence, he heard from victims, women who had been in DOS, women who had been in relationships with Raniere, women whose lives had been shaped by what had happened inside NXIVM, stood before the court and spoke. One woman described the lasting psychological consequences of the manipulation she had experienced. Another described how membership in NXIVM had isolated her from her family, from her sense of self. One described the specific experience of the branding, the physical reality of it, and what it had meant to carry that mark on her body every day. Judge Garaufis, in his sentencing remarks, was direct. He described Raniere as a man who had used manipulation and control to exploit women sexually and financially. He noted the breadth of the conduct. He noted the duration. This had not been a brief aberration, but a pattern sustained across decades. He sentenced Keith Raniere to 120 years in federal prison. 120 years. Raniere was 60 years old at the time of sentencing. The sentence was functionally the rest of his life. He spoke briefly before the sentence was pronounced. He maintained his innocence. He said he believed the trial had been unfair. He said the system had failed. He did not apologize. He has since filed appeals challenging the conviction on multiple grounds. As of the time of this production, those appeals have not succeeded in overturning the verdict. The sentences for the co-defendants unfolded across 2021 and into 2022. Claire Bronfman was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in federal prison. Her attorneys had sought a lighter sentence. The government argued that her wealth and resources had made NXIVM's abuses possible at a scale that would not otherwise have been achievable. Nancy Salzman was sentenced to 3.5 years. The court credited her with cooperation and with her own experience of manipulation within the organization. Lauren Salzman was sentenced to time served and 3 years of supervised release with no prison time. Her extensive cooperation with the government was credited significantly. The sentence sparked debate. Some victims felt it did not adequately reflect the harm she had caused. The court, however, noted that Lauren Salzman had herself been a victim of Raniere's manipulation, that she had been in a romantic relationship with him for approximately 17 years, that he had allegedly promised her a child he never intended to give her, that her own psychological subjugation was real and documented. Allison Mack was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. She was released in 2023. She has been largely silent publicly since her release. For the women who had been in DOS, for the women who had provided testimony, the sentences were a kind of closure, but not a clean one. Closure is rarely clean. Sarah Edmondson, whose decision to speak publicly was among the most consequential acts in breaking this story open, has said that the aftermath was not simply relief. That watching people she had once loved face prison time, people she had recruited, in some cases, people who had also been manipulated, in others, was painful in ways that don't resolve neatly. She has also said that showing her brand publicly was the hardest thing she had ever done, and that she would do it again. The women who had been harmed inside NXIVM did not all have neat endings. Trauma does not resolve with a verdict. The distrust, the lost years, the broken relationships, the psychological patterns that abusive systems instill, those do not evaporate when a judge reads numbers aloud in a courtroom. What the verdict gave, more than anything else, was this: confirmation. Official, documented, legally adjudicated confirmation that what had happened was real, that it was wrong, and that someone was being held accountable for it. That is not nothing, but it is also not everything. In the years since Keith Raniere's arrest and conviction, a great deal has been written and produced about NXIVM. A documentary series, podcasts, books, investigative retrospectives. The public appetite for this story has not diminished, in part because the questions it raises do not go away when the credits roll. How did this happen? How did a man build an organization that, at its height, enrolled tens of thousands of people across multiple countries in a curriculum that, for many of them, was the surface layer over something deeply harmful? Part of the answer is about resources. Claire Bronfman's money gave NXIVM the ability to survive scrutiny that would have destroyed most organizations. It funded legal attacks on journalists. It funded investigations into critics. It funded a reputation management operation that worked for years to maintain NXIVM's credibility with potential recruits and the media. Part of the answer is about the design of the curriculum itself. The early workshops were, by multiple accounts, genuinely engaging. Not because they were sophisticated behavioral science, but because they met real human needs for connection, for recognition, for a sense of personal growth. The positive experience of the early stages created a foundation of trust that made the later stages harder to question. And part of the answer is about the psychology of Keith Raniere himself and the people who surrounded him. Psychologists who have analyzed this case in public forums, though they were not treating Raniere and therefore could not diagnose him, have noted that the profile that emerges from the court record and first-hand testimony is consistent with someone who experienced other people primarily as instruments, who had an extraordinary capacity for reading what people needed and offering it to them, selectively, conditionally, in service of his own interests. The legal system calls this fraud and coercion. Psychology calls it manipulation. Former members call it something simpler: betrayal. Where are the major figures now? Keith Raniere is serving his sentence at United States Penitentiary, Tucson, in Arizona. He has maintained a website operated by supporters who continue to argue for his innocence. He has continued to communicate through intermediaries with some who still believe in him. That is not surprising. It is, in fact, one of the most documented and consistent features of this type of case. The belief systems that sustain high control groups do not dissolve automatically when the leader is imprisoned. For some people, the conviction is itself evidence of persecution, of a conspiracy against something true and important. That, too, is part of what Raniere built. Sarah Edmondson wrote a book about her experience titled Scarred. She has become an advocate for cult education and survivor support, and has worked to raise awareness about the manipulation tactics used in high-control groups. Nancy Salzman completed her prison sentence and has been released. She lives a largely private life. Lauren Salzman has spoken about her experience in ways that reflect ongoing processing of what she lived through as both participant and victim. Allison Mack completed her prison sentence in 2023. She was released and relocated. She has not made major public statements. The Albany community that was home to NXIVM's operations has continued to process the organization's legacy. For a city that was home to this operation for nearly 2 decades, that saw its residents recruited, its public figures donate, its economy touched by NXIVM's money, there's a particular kind of complicated aftermath. Former members who were never in DOS, who genuinely had positive experiences with the early curriculum and community, have had to reckon with the fact that their participation, however innocent, contributed to an organization now defined by its worst acts. That is a particular kind of grief. It doesn't have a simple name. What this case changed, in a structural sense, is modest but real. It contributed to a broader cultural conversation about high control groups, about multi-level marketing, about the way that systems of psychological manipulation exploit genuine human needs. It added specificity to discussions that had often been vague. It gave investigators a documented playbook, and it produced, in the testimony of the women who came forward, a record, not just of what happened, of how it worked, of the 1,000 small steps between "this workshop changed my life" and "I am on a table and I am being burned." Each of those steps felt, at the time, like a choice. Each of those steps was designed to feel that way. That is the thing this story asks you to sit with. Not the obvious monsters, the ones who declare themselves evil from the start. The warning signs on those are visible. The danger is the person who makes you feel seen, who listens, who offers you something real, community, growth, belonging, and uses it to take something from you. The danger is the slow erosion of the distance between who you are and what they want you to be. The danger is the table you didn't know you were walking toward until you were already lying on it. Somewhere right now, another organization is offering something that looks like exactly what someone needs. And that is a thought that doesn't leave you easily. It isn't meant to.